Hello and welcome to Earthcast, a platform for discussions about bridging the resource gap between people and planet. I am Olivia Taylor, or Olivia Earth on the socials, your host, and I will be interviewing a series of change makers, thinkers and disruptors, and asking them about their areas of expertise. Together, we will discover fresh perspectives and the most useful levers in society for change. The main question that we will explore is how are trade-offs made between people, planet and profit? More specifically, how do we solve wicked problems and make decisions at the margin? If you would like to hear more from Earthcast, subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Earthcast. Today I'm speaking to Niharika Elety. Niha is a creative artist and sustainability activist on Instagram. She uses fashion, art, and heritage as a vehicle to bring awareness about sustainability and its importance. Her platform looks to amplify and incorporate Indian heritage to bring inclusivity to the sustainable fashion and environmental movement. She is passionate about using media to amplify social and environmental justice initiatives and BIPOC knowledge. Niha is also the founder and co-creator at TEGA Collective, a sustainable fashion brand that champions Adivasi communities from India and their textile traditions. Thank you so much for joining me. Niha, can you please explain to me the concept of regenerative fashion and what it means to you?
Yes, of course. And thank you so much for having me, Olivia. I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit more about this. In terms of regenerative fashion, I think to me, it's important to just talk about what regenerative sustainability is to begin with. And when it does come to fashion, I think it's a design philosophy that preaches a better lifestyle of making more improvements to the systems around us and leave the systems better than we found them. So something that's degenerative has a negative impact on the planet. Something that is sustainable is just trying to sustain what is already there. But in terms of being regenerative, I think that's the goal for me and the goal for a lot of people in this space, is because creating a positive impact for people on the planet is more important than ever. We won't be able to just focus on sustaining what's already there. I think it's important to go further than that, to actually repair everything that's been damaged. So when it comes to regenerative fashion, there's so many avenues you can explore, but a lot of it does come down to making sure that everything in the supply chain has a reciprocal relationship. So from farm all the way to closet. So when you talk about farming, making sure that you are growing native plants and fibers that are native to the region that you're on, and making sure that the soil is sequestering carbon and you're growing things in a regenerative way, all the way to the farmers that you're working with. You know, do you have a positive and impactful relationship with the people who support you in these supply chains? Because I feel like a lot of focus might be on, regenerative agriculture is the future, but what about the people in the supply chain? I think it's really important to make sure that you have a mutually beneficial relationship with the farmers, the artisans, the garment workers, and everyone up until, the closet. So that's sort of what I believe is really important in fashion specifically. And I think this whole concept of regeneration is something it's not new. It's being posed as something new, but indigenous cultures around the world have been talking about it for millennia and living it. So that's really important to understand. And it's also important to understand that we are not dissociated from nature. I think that's often what people sort of assume, and understanding that we have such an important role to play in our ecosystem can help us create that positive impact. Because the more we try to minimize our impact, you can't minimize yourself so much that you don't exist. This earth needs people. People are important. And so that's another thing. I think language is incredibly important when you are defining what it means to be regenerative. We are a part of nature. We're not, different from it. So all of these concepts are incredibly important, especially in the fashion space. And there is a brand called Oshadi Collective in India that's doing incredible work, creating reciprocal relationships with everyone in the supply chain and creating regenerative cotton in their collections. So I think they're definitely people to follow and take inspiration from.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for giving that name of that organization we should follow, and also really explaining what it means to understand regenerative fashion. I think a lot of people think of things that are already damaged as areas of land and society that are too far gone. And this idea of regeneration I find really refreshing. And it really it really kind of gets rid of that eco-fascist idea that humans are the virus, and that particularly spread badly during COVID. But Niha, further, as a fashion designer, where do you need to make trade-offs between social and environmental justice and profits? For example, when you create a garment, where the material is not obviously unsustainable for either people or planet, how do you make that decision whether or not to use it? How do you navigate this gray area? And do you make this decision based on gut instinct, or do you use a specific sustainability metric?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you asked this question, because I think a lot of what people are looking for is, what is the most sustainable fabric that I can use in my collections? How can I, in terms of environmental impact, do the best that I can? And there's always going to be a trade-off no matter what, because you can't do everything on this planet. It's not sustainable for yourself or your business. But for me, what I focus on is native fibers that are native to the regions that that we're producing in. So, for example, in India, there's a lot of indigenous fibers that are either unexplored or, that a lot of people might not know about. So, khadi is an indigenous cotton in India. And if you go further up to the northeast in the Himalayan regions, there are fibers being made from banana leaves and lotus stems. So I truly believe that it's important to explore those fibers that are native to your lands, because that's the most sustainable. Restoring native biodiversity, I think, is the most important thing that we need to do. And it's an incredibly important part of regeneration. So that's something that we often forget, because we're constantly focused on metrics, whether it be, how much water does cotton use, how much water does hemp or linen use. And the more we use these fibers, they're going to turn into another cotton. If we keep using, huge amounts of hemp and creating monocultures across the whole planet, it's going to turn into the same thing. So I really believe going back to smaller scales and focusing on indigenous varieties is probably the way to go. So that's what I focus on in terms of figuring out how to navigate this question.
And then, how often are you confronted with greenwashing in this space? I can imagine a lot of people are approaching you now and asking you to perhaps, do collaborations with them and work with them. How do you deal with this in practice?
Yeah, for me, I am often confronted with greenwashing in terms of the brands I try to collaborate with, or even in terms of just what I've been seeing on these platforms. And for me, when it is a collaboration, I don't really engage in those types of collaborations. I think it's pretty easy to tell when something's greenwashing and when it's not, for me at least. But I think in terms of, generally seeing brands on the platform, I very often try to look and understand if the brand's intention is marketing, or, how are they actually going about their practices and engaging in sustainability beyond just their garments, right? So many brands, the way they frame sustainability is, I have this product and this product is sustainable. Look at how much water we've reduced, or, look at the fibers that we are making it out of. But beyond that, what are they doing to truly engage in sustainability beyond just their product? Because technically a product can't be sustainable, right? It's the practices that you're implementing that, that's what sustainability is. Sustainability isn't an item. So it's really important to go and look, how are they treating their workers? Are they creating any sort of reparations to the global South? How much are they focusing on this responsibility? Because that's what truly shows the character of a brand, I feel. So that's sort of how I try to work with the different brands, or even just support the different brands that I come across.
Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. I often ask myself this question, especially for someone like myself who's quite active online. What does useful climate activism look like? And I want to know, what can this look like for individuals? And then more importantly, corporates and government. Not all the attention should be on individuals and what they should, avoiding the plastic straw. But, perhaps individuals can play a role in holding corporates and government accountable. But, first of all, I want to know, what does climate activism usefully look like for individuals and corporates? And then further, I want to know, why are BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color, more vulnerable to climate change?
Yeah, of course. So for the first question, what does climate activism look like? And I think it can look many different ways depending on, the individual. And I think it's just important to focus on what you're really passionate about, because that's what you're going to be able to sustain yourself in your daily life. You don't want to just be very, do like a one-time thing. I think activism is important to be recurring throughout your journey in sustainability. So for me, I think when you talk about individuals, there's so many ways we can do it. But if I want to talk about fashion specifically, I think something that's not talked about enough is forming true connections with our clothing, or even just with the people behind it, because it's what we've noticed in our generation specifically is a lot of us don't know how clothes, I mean, now we do because it's been brought to light, but we never really knew like where our clothes were coming from. We never really knew where our food was coming from, or how much time and effort it took to create any of these things. We were quite, unaware of that. And so really making those connections and understanding, I think, is what really helps shift the mindsets overall. And something that is very different in, for example, India, that's where I'm from, is a lot of clothing creation is extremely accessible there. Most consumers are aware of the process of creating clothing, and they participate in it. So they will go and buy different fibers from the weavers, and they will go to their local tailor and figure out what silhouette they want, create it custom made to measure. And, you're supporting your local supply chain, and it's all accessible, and you're creating pieces that you've literally, co-created. And so those mean a lot to you, and you're not going to just throw them away. So really forming intimate connections with different processes is incredibly important in truly framing our mindsets for this activism, I feel. And then in terms of, just individuals, we can do a lot and vote for different bills and policies that do support climate activism. In terms of corporations and government, I think there's not a lot of focus on reparations to the global South and their waste. I think a lot of people ask, why do these other countries not ban imports from the global North? Because there's so much textile waste, or even general waste, that is shipped from the global North to countries in the global South to just get rid of it. But I think a question that we never really ask is, why are people in the global North not banning exports, right? I mean, it's so easy to say, why are these people not accepting stuff? But, people in these countries need to make money, and that's all that they have at that moment because of colonization and everything. So it's really important for us to pay reparations. So we really need to clean up our mess in these other countries, because they are filled with landfills from the waste of the global north. And it's just, it's not fair whatsoever. So those are just a few things that I think corporations need to focus on, and as well as, taking care of their own waste as well. I think the life cycle of a lot of clothes, people assume ends with the consumer, and corporations just need to be more active in not just throwing away their waste, but they're responsible for their waste too, just as much as they're responsible for creating the product. So those are just a few things that we need to focus on.
Thank you so much for answering that. I completely agree with this concept that organizations, these corporates, keep externalizing their business costs on the environment and local communities, particularly those that are most vulnerable and don't have voices to, or that they have voices, but their voices are not loud and not amplified. And I want to know, why is sustainable fashion not being created to be accessible to most people? And how can it be justified as sustainable if it's not affordable? I live in Cape Town, and a lot of brands are like, oh, we're a sustainable brand, but the clothing is triple the price of something at a local retailer, which is affordable to most of the population. Surely affordability is a necessary condition of sustainability.
Yes. And, this is something that's often debated in this space, right? Like, what is affordable? And I mean, it's something that's, there's no straight answer to, of course. But I do think it is important to question, why do we think a shirt is worth as much as a cup of coffee? Like, why they should not be priced similarly? Like it's pretty clear that the labor is not being paid being paid well, if that's the case. But I think it's really important to buy less and buy well overall. Back in the day, with our parents, they only owned a few dresses, and those dresses were made incredibly well. They would go to their local tailors and get them stitched, participate in that process of creating clothing. And so, if people, want to focus on affordability, I think we need to be able to create a lot of accessibility in countries in the global north. Within different malls, have an on-site tailor or on-site people to upcycle things that you have and create something out of it. Have fabric that you can just go and get stitched up, but have it be more accessible price wise and really participate in the process of creating your clothing. I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. And another thing is, a lot of us have lost skills in terms of knowing how to make clothes, knowing how to farm, just knowing these basic life skills. And I think that's due to the nature of everything being industrialized and people not having as much time for things anymore, but really going back to those essential skills and things like that, I think are really important and will really help understand a lot of it.
I've been following you on social media for quite a long time, and I've been so inspired by your incredibly playful and feminine sense of fashion. How do you combine the frivolity of fashion with the earnestness of social and environmental concerns linked to the industry?
Yeah. I think that's a common thing that people think about when it comes to fashion. I mean, first of all, thank you. It's very sweet. But yeah, I think I personally love fashion. And I think growing up, I never really found it frivolous because, it's very much art, and there's so much that goes into it, right? So much that people have to learn and understand to create clothes. The immense knowledge that these artisans and weavers have and skills that they have is so deep, and it's often overlooked and not given the high regard that it deserves. And fashion is truly deeper than aesthetics as well. Fashion helps people keep traditions and culture alive. There's a lot of talk within the dynamics of labor and oppression and environmental degradation. So there's a lot about fashion that is, I guess, deeper than the frivolity of it. And that's why I sort of combine both and talk about it, because it's very easy to forget about that. And something that I do talk about a lot is the aesthetics of everything. So, in the world in general, right, after colonization, in India specifically, in a lot of countries, or even in the continent of Africa, a lot of people were made to dress like the Western colonizers. And with that, a lot of traditional garments, or even just wanting to wear traditional garments, as often sort of went away. And with our generation, we, as much as we want to, we sort of gravitate towards Western aesthetics, whether it be, minimal colors, different shades of beige, and just monochromatic layered closets and things like that. That's sort of what we gravitate towards. And what I really like to play with on my page is, how important it is to keep cultural elements alive in cultural clothing, because a lot of this clothing has so much meaning, whether it be the bright colors. I mean, these colors were freedom of expression for a lot of communities, BIPOC communities around the world. And they were labeled as cheap and tacky and gaudy. And, it's important to remember that these colors, kept people's spirits alive and their cultures alive. So I like to talk about aesthetics a lot on my page as well. And it's important. It's definitely not frivolous to me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that reminder, that the poignant reminder that, fashion really isn't something frivolous, and perhaps when done right and when given the respect, absolutely appreciates the earnestness of the social environmental concerns, because it respects where the garment came from. So thank you so much for explaining that in such depth. And before I ask my last question, Niha, I could honestly chat to you all evening, but I just wanted to say to the people following, if you'd like to follow some more of Niha's work, you can follow her on Instagram at Niharika Elety, Nihaelety, or you could follow her blog online, elety at niha.com. Niha, thank you so much. I have so appreciated your discussion. It's been really humbling for me to speak to you. So, Niha, last question of the evening. Given your expertise, what question should I have asked you?
Yeah, I think one question that I don't see a lot in this space is, what sort of connections do you see between sustaining culture and cultural diversity within sustainability? Because so often we focus on different, aspects of environmentalism, whether it be fair wages as well as eco-friendly fabrics. And so cultural sustainability is often left out of the conversation, especially, talking about the impacts of colonization and how that has created a lot of the systems that we have today. So would love more people to ask me that question.
Thank you for joining me today at Earthcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. Let's chat next episode, where I will be asking more creatives and intellectual disruptors about making decisions at the margin. See you next time.